You have been told your whole life that kindness is a virtue, that helping people is good, that putting others first makes you a better person, and you believed it because it felt true, because the people who told you were the people you trusted most. What they didn't tell you is that kindness without boundaries is not a virtue. It is an invitation, and some people will accept that invitation every single time. You know this feeling. You said yes when you meant no. You gave when you had nothing left to give. You stayed when leaving was the only sane option. You absorbed someone else's anger, someone else's chaos, someone else's responsibility, and called it loyalty. And afterward, you wondered why you felt so empty, why the people you gave the most to seemed to appreciate it the least. Why being good felt so much like being used. This video is not going to tell you to stop being kind. Kindness is not the problem. The problem is something specific that happens inside the psychology of genuinely kind people that makes them extraordinarily easy to exploit. Something that was shaped long before you were old enough to recognize it. Something that has been operating in your relationships, your workplace, your family, every single day, and something that can be changed. Not by becoming harder, not by becoming cold, but by understanding precisely why it happens and what the people who take advantage of you are actually responding to. The psychology of the giver. There is a type of person that psychologists have studied extensively. They are warm, generous, deeply empathetic. They feel other people's pain almost as acutely as their own. They are the first to offer help and the last to ask for it. They find genuine satisfaction in making other people's lives easier, and they have an almost compulsive difficulty with disappointing people. The technical term is high agreeableness. The lived experience is something most people in this category recognize immediately. The inability to say no without guilt. The tendency to prioritize everyone else's comfort over their own. The exhausting internal negotiation that happens every time a boundary needs to be set. This is not weakness. It is, in many cases, the product of a childhood where being agreeable was the safest strategy available, where conflict was dangerous, where someone else's emotional state was your responsibility to manage, where love felt conditional on your compliance. The child who learned that keeping the peace was the price of being loved becomes the adult who cannot stop keeping the peace, even when it is costing them everything. What exploitative people actually see here is the thing that most kind people never fully understand. The people who take advantage of them are not operating randomly. They are not stumbling accidentally into a dynamic that happens to work in their favor. They are, consciously or not, reading signals, and kind people broadcast those signals clearly. The first signal is the difficulty with no. When someone struggles to say no, the people around them notice, not always consciously, but they notice. They notice that requests are met with accommodation rather than refusal. They notice that pushback produces anxiety rather than firmness. They notice that the boundary, when it appears, is soft enough to negotiate, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. They ask for more because they have learned that more is available. The second signal is the over-explanation. When a kind person does manage to say no, they almost never say it cleanly. They apologize. They justify. They provide context. They soften. I'm so sorry, I really wish I could, but I would love to help, but unfortunately, I feel terrible saying this, but each of these phrases does the same thing. It communicates that the no is uncomfortable, that it is negotiable, that enough pressure, enough guilt, enough disappointment might produce a different answer. And the person on the receiving end applies exactly that pressure, because they have been taught by the over-explanation itself that the door is not fully closed. The third signal is the absorption of blame. Kind people have a tendency to assume responsibility for other people's emotional states. When someone is angry, the kind person wonders what they did wrong. When someone is disappointed, the kind person feels guilty. When someone is unhappy in any way that might conceivably be connected to them, the kind person works to fix it. This tendency is exploited with devastating efficiency by a certain type of person. The person who has learned that expressing displeasure produces compliance, that anger gets results, that disappointment is a lever. They don't need to threaten, they don't need to demand. They simply need to be unhappy in your presence, and you will do the rest yourself. Epictetus knew this 2,000 years ago. Epictetus was born a slave in the Roman Empire. He had no freedom, no rights, no control over almost anything in his external life, and yet he became one of the most influential philosophers in history because he understood something about the nature of suffering that most free people spend their entire lives failing to grasp. He wrote that people are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things. Specifically, he identified the source of most human misery as a single error, treating things outside your control as if they were inside it, and things inside your control as if they were outside it. For the kind person who is constantly exploited, this distinction is everything. You cannot control whether someone is disappointed in you. You cannot control whether someone is angry. You cannot control whether someone feels let down or hurt or frustrated by your decision. These are their responses, their emotions, entirely outside your control. What is inside your control is your answer, your boundary, your choice about what you will and will not do. The moment you accept responsibility for other people's emotional reactions to your decisions, you have handed control of your life to whoever is willing to feel the most dramatically in your presence. Epictetus, who had nothing, understood that this was the one freedom that could never be taken, the freedom to choose your response. The kind person who exhausts themselves managing everyone else's feelings has given away the only thing that was ever truly theirs. The pattern in relationships. There is a specific pattern that appears in the relationships of people who are chronically taken advantage of. It begins with generosity. They give freely and genuinely. The other person receives, and then something shifts. The giving begins to be expected. What was once appreciated becomes assumed. What was once a gift becomes a baseline. And when the giving slows, when the kind person finally reaches a limit and gives a little less, the reaction is not gratitude for what was given. It is resentment for what was withheld. This pattern is not accidental. It is the predictable result of a dynamic where generosity has no limits. When you give without boundaries, you do not create gratitude. You create entitlement, because entitlement is simply the belief that what has always been provided will always be provided. You train them to expect it by providing it without condition, without limit, without the occasional no that would have reminded them that what they were receiving was a choice, not a right. This is one of the most painful realizations for genuinely kind people, that their own generosity created the problem. Not because generosity is wrong, but because generosity without limits does not communicate love. It communicates availability, and availability without conditions is not respected. It is consumed. How to stop it without becoming someone else? The answer is not to become cold. It is not to stop caring. It is not to transform yourself into someone you are not. The answer is something much more specific. It is to understand that a limit is not a betrayal of your kindness. It is the thing that makes your kindness mean something. Think of it this way. If you gave everyone you met $100 every single time you saw them, what would happen to the value of that $100? It would become expected. It would become meaningless. It would no longer be a gift. It would be a scheduled payment. Now imagine you gave that same $100 once, unexpectedly, to someone who needed it. With no strings attached and no expectation of return, the difference in how that gift lands is not about the amount. It is about the scarcity. Things that are always available are never fully valued. Things that are chosen, deliberate, offered from a place of genuine abundance rather than compulsive giving, land completely differently. Your kindness is the same. The kindness that flows from someone who could say no but chooses yes is entirely different from the kindness of someone who cannot say no at all. One is a gift, the other is a reflex, and people can tell the difference. Even when they don't say so, the practical change. There is one specific change that shifts the dynamic more than anything else. Learn to say no without explaining it, not rudely, not coldly, just cleanly. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. No apology attached, no justification offered, no door left open for negotiation. This will feel almost physically uncomfortable the first time you do it. The guilt will arrive immediately. The urge to soften, to explain, to take it back will be overwhelming. Let it be there. Do not act on it, because what happens next is the most important part. The person in front of you will either accept the no or they will push. And if they push, you will have learned something about them that you needed to know. A person who respects you accepts a no. A person who is exploiting you cannot. The clean no is not just a boundary. It is a test, and the results will tell you everything. There is a version of kindness that costs you nothing, not because it is less generous, but because it comes from a place of genuine joy, because the people receiving it know that it was not automatic, that you could have withheld it, that you chose, specifically and deliberately, to give it to them. That kind of kindness is received completely differently. It is treasured, it is remembered, it is returned, not because you demanded it, but because people understand instinctively that something chosen is worth more than something assumed. You were not taken advantage of because you were too kind. You were taken advantage of because you were kind without limits, and limits are not the enemy of kindness. They are the thing that gives it meaning. The people in your life who deserve your generosity will love you more for having them. The people who disappear when the limits appear were never there for you. They were there for what you provided. And now that you know the difference, you can choose who gets what, deliberately, from strength, not from the old compulsion that was never really yours to begin with. VeilMind, decode the hidden rules of the mind. They never taught you this in school.